In this video, I want to look at relative risk and absolute risk difference. We're looking at data for betel nut chewers and non-chewers. We're looking at data for oral cancers among Pompe 18 to 24-year-olds based on 2010 population data and a 2019 study of by the Pacific Island Health Organization of oral cancer rates. The base population we're looking at is 4,960 Pompeians 18 to 24 years old in 2010. There were 2,063 did not chew. We've got 2,896 chewers, at least based on the 2019 data. More than half of this youth group chews betel nut. We get about 113 total oral cancers, with 106 due to betel nut with tobacco, and 7 betel nut only, those who chew without. 94% of the chewers are chewing with tobacco. Only about 6% are chewing without tobacco. The non-chewers in that group, they do not develop oral cancer. The risk for the non-chewers is simply 0. I want to look at the relative risk and the absolute risk for the betel nut only cancers and the betel nut plus tobacco cancer developers. In other words, what difference does adding tobacco to that betel nut chew make in terms of your relative risk and your absolute risk difference? The risk of developing cancer among chewers, remember, the non-chewers up here, they do not develop cancer. Their risk is simply 0%. But the betel nut only cancers, those will be those who chew only with only chew betel nut, lime, and copoy, no tobacco. Their risk out of this group, I'm using in the denominator the chewers because the non-chewers simply don't develop cancer. These 7 cases are coming out of the chewing population. So, to get this right, it's equal to the 7 divided by the 2896 chewers. There we go. About 0.24%. A small risk, but a risk. Once you add tobacco, though, among that group, we have 106 have developed cancer. We're going to divide by the chewing population there. Again, our non-chewers aren't developing it, so I have a 106 divided by that. I get about a 3.66% rate of cancers. My relative risk is simply equal to this divided by this. Press check. About 15 times greater risk of developing cancer when you add tobacco, usually in the form of a cigarette, to your betel nut chew. That absolute risk difference is equal to this minus that. The betel nut plus tobacco minus those who chew without tobacco. So that risk difference is about 3.42%. I put formulas in here before the video to calculate these, to just say what it looks like as a percentage. These are the same number here. These two are the same number. These two here are the same number. This is as a decimal on the left, on the right is as a percentage. I prefer to work with decimals. We often report them as percentages. So, upshot is you have a 15-fold increase in the risk of oral cancer when you add that cigarette or tobacco. If you chew without tobacco, you still have a risk, but it's a much smaller risk. And of course, if you don't chew betel nut at all, and you don't chew tobacco with betel nut or tobacco, you have no risk of oral cancer over the next 10 years. These are all on 10-year time frames. This is done on a 10-year time frame. The incidence rate underneath these calculations is a 10-year time frame. So over the 10-year time frame, this age group, 113 will develop oral cancer, which is a terrible tragedy for such a young group that has really very few other risk factors facing it at this age. But these 18 to 24-year-olds will be 25 to 34 in 10 years. They have very little in the way of other risk factors. Well, in 10 years, they'll be 28 to 34, I should say. 28 to 34. But they'll be in the next age group up, a bit more than 10 years up. But they'll be 10 years up. You'll see 113 oral cancers develop in that group. And relative risk, 15 times risk. 15-fold increase in risk, a great increase. And this is just over 10 years. If you keep chewing for 20 years, and for the next 20 years, this risk goes up significantly. You're looking basically at on the order of a doubled risk of cancers. 30%, 1 in 3 developing oral cancers. So the risk is there. The recommendation is always to not chew. Yes, it's a cultural practice by the Yapese. It is not a cultural practice of the Chukis, Pohnpeians, and Kushians. And chewing with tobacco is not anyone's cultural practice. Tobacco comes from North America. It was not part of the chew originally. That's an addition, and that's where the problem has come in. It's the tobacco that supercharges the carcinogenicity, that is the cancer-causing effect of betel nut. Get rid of the tobacco. This is hard. It's not easy because actually what the chewer is addicted to is probably nicotine, the active ingredient in tobacco, more so than ericoline, the active ingredient in betel nut. They're addicted to both, but it's the tobacco withdrawal. Dropping back to plain betel nut will be very, very, very difficult. But you face a greatly increased risk of developing cancer over a lifetime, oral cancer, if you're a chewer with tobacco. I hope this helps you work out the problems this week and think about them from the health perspective as well as from the statistical side. But it is getting the tobacco out of betel nut is the first step and to a healthier population. And that may be very difficult because, as I noted, 94% chew with tobacco and with terribly tragic outcomes. As I know all too well personally, I've been to funerals for young students who've left behind young children, and oral cancer took them away way too young. In their late 20s and in their early 30s, they're gone, and their children are left without a father or mother. Well, I thank you for watching.